Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Dan Nash and I'm joined as always by Owain. So today we're going to talk about strength training and a bit of a deeper dive into how can strength training influence performance. Is it beneficial? What adaptations is it going to give you that are going to help you improve or not improve as an endurance runner? So basically, what can S&C do for you? What's it not going to do for you? But we've sort of we covered in like in the Road to Valencia series a bit of like why I've started to introduce S&C training into my training program, and we went into a little bit of detail here, but we just want to unpick that a bit more in a full episode dedicated on S&C. Do you want to start us off, Owain? Do you want to?
Yeah, 100%. So I think maybe up front it's worth sort of getting some, I guess, myths and sort of concerns distance runners might have with strength training. I think, to be honest, Joe, it's not even distance runners, it's just anyone, I think, worries that the second they touch a weight, they're going to put on mass. There's a few specific conditions you need to meet to put on any sort of like muscle. But yeah, let's talk about that, I guess, initially. So that would be called hypertrophy in sort of scientific terms, is muscle gain or cross-sectional area gain. Immediately with regard to endurance runners, you're not going to put on much, if any, sort of muscle mass because of endurance running. There's quite a lot of work that shows that you blunt any sort of muscle size gains and therefore mass gains by endurance running. We can sort of get into the, I guess, cellular level reasoning behind that, but so if you've been considering strength and conditioning as something that might, you've heard like elite runners, people like Dan doing S&C, but you're worried that you're going to put on muscle, and you think that putting on weight is potentially detrimental to endurance exercise, but just immediately off the bat, that isn't going to happen.
And I guess there's a number of reasons why. One, like you said about, is that actually there's some good evidence to suggest that some of the signaling pathways that you activate with endurance running actually turn off the signaling pathways but lead to hypertrophy. So often I would advise people to, I think we talked about it a little bit on that previous Run to Valencia series, but run first and then do your gym. Don't gym then run, because the running might turn off that signaling cascade that leads to hypertrophy, or just not even just hypertrophy, but just strength gains in general. So if you actually want to get some benefit out of the strength training, like maybe don't run afterwards. It's not going to make the difference between getting absolutely, it's probably like it's a spectrum, you're not going to get to completely turn off that signaling pathway and get no benefits from your strength training if you run later. But yeah, that's one thing, is the signaling pathway. There's other things though, like actually how much lifting are you doing? If you look at like the gym bros who are in the gym doing 5 or 6 days a week, then actually just the amount of strength training you're going to be doing is not going to be this, even as an elite runner, it's just not going to be the same as someone who's really looking to put on a lot of muscle mass, a rugby player who's going to get strong. That's another part of it.
Yeah, and I guess if we think about like if you follow a resistance training program, and let's take like endurance running out of it, you're expecting over some time to have that amount of hypertrophy and to have bigger muscles. There's also going to be some neuromuscular changes as well, and then there's going to be some fiber and muscle fiber changes. Endurance training sort of wipes out the sort of muscle mass gain, but you can still get the other benefits. So the neuromuscular benefits, which is really what we want and really what is going to actually potentially improve endurance performance. And like Dan said, generally after you lift weights, you're going to have a sort of elevation of muscle protein synthesis, but if you're also endurance training, that's really blunted. And especially if you train before, just looking through my notes, there's some work where they've changed whether you run or you lift first, and you're going to really blunt that sort of upregulation of muscle protein synthesis. So that's going to blunt the the sort of mass gains, but you're still potentially going to get these neuromuscular gains, which are going to impact your running performance down the line.
And the other thing is the energy availability and the protein intake. Like if you really want to put on muscle mass and get big, then you need to be eating a lot of food, which endurance athletes are getting in a lot of food, like, and a lot of calories. But it's the energy availability in terms of if you're spending most of that energy on just normal bodily functions, so your resting metabolic rate plus all the running you're doing, that's not going to leave a whole massive calorie surplus for putting on muscle mass.
I think in general, even if you take away running, like putting on muscle mass is really difficult. Like you need to do a lot of work and you need to provide all of these ingredients to the body, which, yeah, you know, people reading and people in the gym are probably going to do, but like average person on the street having a bit more protein or like lifting weights a couple of times a week for sort of longer term health isn't. I know someone we're probably going to cite a lot and who's definitely worth a follow on Twitter is Stuart Phillips. His research group is probably like the leaders of putting out work on resistance training. And I've heard him say on a podcast, like, if you're someone that thinks that if you lift weights twice a week, you're going to put on way too much muscle, like he actually wants you to get in contact with him because you'd be going against all of the other evidence and he wants to study you. But yeah, you know, you always hear people like when you say like, oh, maybe you should eat a bit more protein, they're like, but I'm going to put on muscle mass. It's like, yeah, you're not. There's so many ingredients that go into
that's another like misnomer, is that you can just eat yourself bigger, eat yourself stronger by just eating more protein. That's not how it works. You need to combine the actual training with the energy intake and the protein intake.
So where to put on muscle, there's these really specific ingredients. When you add in endurance training, that really adds in, or sort of adds in a problem, or, you know, if you're making a cake, it sort of ruins your cake, where you're not going to put on loads of muscle. So I guess, you know, straight off the bat, if you're thinking about resistance training, you're not going to, you know, in 6 months time, you're not going to be 10 kilos heavier and it's all going to be lean muscle mass. We're really targeting these sort of neuromuscular changes, rather than size.
But I think one more thing on the hypertrophy is for some people, actually, maybe a bit of hypertrophy would be good. Like I'm thinking about not always, but often women with low BMIs, like for them, putting on some muscle mass might actually be beneficial if it's functional tissue that can produce more force output. Then that could actually be beneficial, certainly in certain situations, depending on the event you're training for.
But we focus on the marathon, don't we? But actually, if you're an 815 runner, you might want
like if you're an 800 meter runner, especially a male 800 meter runner, but in the female side as well, then you need to be able to put out some massive force. You have some really big force outputs. Like you need to be able to sprint really fast. You need to be able to squat heavy, to be able to have just the functional strength to do that. Like, you know, you need to be closer to what you'd probably describe as a hybrid athlete these days. If you're an 800 meter type athlete, or even like a 1500 meter in a tactical race. Like if you look at the build of, for example, Jakob Ingebrigtsen versus Eliud Kipchoge, like they are different builds. Like they are Jakob just needs more muscle mass, more strength to be able to like close in a 50-second last lap in a tactical race. And even Jakob, who's not known for his speed, he's still like, if you put him in a race with Kipchoge for 400 meters, well, I know who's going to win that. It's not going to be Kipchoge, who's probably weighs about 55 kilos. It's going to be Jakob, who's probably 65, 70 kilos.
And I think, you know, not just endurance running specific, but just general health, probably actually worth lifting some weights.
I think I mentioned it before, but like before I started, I'm so conditioned just to run long for a reasonably fast pace. I'm so unconditioned to do anything else. And that was
any runner that's tried another sport will know.
I used to play a bit of squash growing up, and I think in uni, like I managed to we've a few mates thought, we'll get a squash court, book a squash court out. I had like DOMs for a week after that, just from like the impact, the you know, same with, I remember going for a climbing session as well, like going climbing once, which I've done a bit historically, but went to a climbing wall, an hour or so of climbing, like can't feel my arms for a week afterwards. That's I think just for all that round, that's probably a sign that you're not strong enough if you can't cope with just other, a slight deviation from your normal routine, like just trying something else. Then actually it's probably an idea that you're too specialized, isn't it? I would say.
Yeah.
Getting sidetracked now.
So yeah, if we so the normal sort of like general idea of what you would expect to see if you do resistance training, take away muscle, there might be a really, really small muscle mass gain, but there's not going to be loads. Again, like I said, if you are someone that suddenly puts on 10 pounds or 10 kilos of lean body mass, contact Stuart Phillips because he wants to study you. You're going against decades worth of data to suggest that isn't going to happen. But there are going to be some other changes that are going to be really, really useful potentially for endurance running. So I think we've mentioned it in previous podcasts, but there's a few different types of fiber within the muscle. So you've got type 1 fibers, which is the sort of really important one for endurance running. That's the slow twitch muscle fiber, the one that
slow twitch, fatigue resistant. Like they always talk about, the red fibers, because if you were to the dark meat on a chicken, for example, like that's got much more mitochondria in, it's much more vascularized because it's designed for going long basically and producing force for a long period of time. So your slow twitch ones.
So like Dan said, lots more mitochondria and better functioning mitochondria, more capillarized as well. So the ones that you really want for endurance running are the type 1 fibers. And then you have type 2 fibers, and there's two types. There's type 2A and type 2X. It used to be A and B, I think, but it's A and X now.
I'll be honest, I get confused with which is which. I normally just go fast and slow twitch. And there's people saying it's more of a continuum versus these three different types. But the principle's still the same, but we've got different types of muscle fiber, isn't there?
So generally, if you took someone that just was on the couch and never done any exercise, they're going to have actually quite a lot of type 2X fibers. They're the strongest fibers, but they also fatigue really, really quick. And then type 2A are, again, they're still fast twitch fibers, but they have a bit more fatigue resistance. They, I don't want to say have endurance capacity because you don't want to be running a marathon with loads of type 2A fibers necessarily, but they fatigue a bit slower than the type 2X fibers. And generally what happens if you start a strength training intervention, again, this is someone off the sofa, they're going to shift a lot of those type 2X fibers to type 2A fibers, which would maybe seem counterintuitive. You'd maybe think actually you want the strongest fibers, but the type 2A fibers, that fatigue resistance that they have compared to the type 2X fibers is just so much more beneficial for anything beyond that sort of 1 rep max. And that's a quite quick sort of change that you see with someone off the sofa, but then also in endurance athletes, you're also going to see that sort of shift to type 2A fibers. I think the only population which maybe in a sporting context want to keep that sort of type 2X fiber is sprinters. And that's only the really short, that's 60 and 100 meter sprinters.
I think there's a nice case study paper of Colin Jackson, who was they biopsied him at the end of his career, and he had a very high percentage of type 2X fibers despite all the training he's done, which is in the paper they suggested that was that made him so good in that he was resistant to this conversion of type 2X to type 2A muscle fibers, so he could maintain that explosiveness and that ability to produce really, really high force outputs instead of converting it to these more fatigue resistant type 2A, sorry.
We're getting confused as well.
I know.
But so starting strength training, you're going to see that muscle fiber shift, and that is going to mean that although, like we said, you still want as many type 1 muscle fibers as possible for endurance performance, if you can shift some of the type 2 fibers from X to A, you're going to have a bit more fatigue resistance. The other sort of changes you're going to expect to see if you start resistance training, you're going to see just an increase in maximal strength and rate of force development as well. which are important to running. Every time you contact the ground, your muscle fibers are contracting. So if you can produce force faster, that's going to be beneficial. And then if you have a higher maximal strength, that means you're actually working at a lower percentage of your maximal strength every time you take a step, basically. So in the same way, maybe if you increase your VO2 max, and then it means that you're running a marathon at a lower percent of your VO2 max. If you increase your maximal strength, that means that every stride you take is a lower percentage of your maximal strength. That's also going to be beneficial.
Yeah, I think just to step back, just to take one step back and talk about actually why we're getting this conversion of 2x to 2A or 2A to type 1 fibers. You only train the fibers that you recruit. So most people, I would have always been under this assumption before I probably did any any research into this, but you think that you recruit all your muscles at once, and you'd think, well, you just you don't activate them fully. If you're walking, if you're jogging, you're activating your muscles a bit more, and if you're sprinting, you're just activating all your muscle fibers as much as you can. But that's not actually how it works. You recruit your fiber type. You recruit your fibers based on this size principle, in that small slow twitch fibers, which are smaller than the type 2 fibers, you start using them first when you're just going for an easy run. And as the intensity gets higher, you start using your type 2A fibers in addition to the type 1s. And then when you're really going flat out, sprinting your 100 meters, you use your type 1, your type 2A, and your type 2Xs. So if you actually need to spend your training times doing continuous running at an easy pace, and even if you're doing like VO2 max type intervals, you're probably not recruiting all of your muscle fibers in one go, because you don't need to. You're not producing your maximal force output. Like you're still a long way below the amount of force you would generate if you did a 1 rep max in the gym. That's what I'm trying to say. So doing strength training is going to actually start training these more fast twitch fibers. And any sort, as we've already said, any sort of training is going to make them more endurance based. Even like you getting those type 2Xs, they become more like type 2As, and like those type 2As will become more like type 1s. And I think there's debate or not about whether you can have a full transition from a type 2 to a type 1, but they're the sort of phenotypic changes you see over the course of a career of endurance running, that actually all these like fast twitch fibers just become a bit more fatigue resistant, and maybe not quite type 1 fibers themselves, but type 1 like fibers.
Yeah, 100%.
So
yeah, I mean those. No. I think that sums it up, because those are the changes you would expect. Like we said, sort of take muscle mass gain off the table, and those are sort of what we're left with, which actually is really beneficial potentially for endurance running. I would say chucking this curveball in there maybe, but there's possibly some injury resistance benefits as well. I don't think the sort of possible benefits are completely clear. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I think its research is really hard to do, because it's very much based upon the individual, isn't it? Like I very rarely get injured, which is one of the reasons why I didn't adopt strength training earlier, because I didn't need to do it to be able to maintain my running all the time. But for some people, like we know that actually strength training is a massive part of the rehab process for almost all injuries. Like an Achilles, if you've got Achilles pain, there's a very formulaic protocol that you would use to rehab that Achilles, which is going to involve slowly increasing the load you put through that. Starting off with more isometric stuff, then moving to more stuff that's ballistic, like doing plyometrics. And that's how you get your Achilles stronger, more functional, ready to tolerate the loads of experiences when running. So if you're someone who's really prone to Achilles injuries, then actually, strength training might be really, really injury preventive for you. But some things are more like just wear and tear, like to do with your biomechanics, how you run, your natural genetics, what's your diet like? Have you got good bone health? Because you've got a good, you've slowly progressed your training over years, and you've got a good energy balance. You're not going into that red S type syndrome. Then actually, strength training is probably not the thing that's going to make the difference there necessarily. Like, because it would be coming down to if you're not fueling enough, then you're going to probably get a bone stress injury.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the research is actually a bit inconclusive on whether strength training does prevent injuries or not. But I think actually in balance it probably does, but it's a bit case specific. That's my interpretation. What do you reckon?
Yeah, like you say, if you don't get injured much, then like, not that you're necessarily doing something right, but why necessarily change what you're doing, I guess.
But again,
whereas,
I think it's a research situation though, and you talked about a person who doesn't need strength training, then you'd add in the strength training and that wouldn't affect their injury frequency. So for that person, like, then it's going, you do your statistics and you go, wow, strength training doesn't actually make a difference. But that's because you've got 10 athletes in your cohort who it didn't make a difference for, but one athlete actually made a massive difference. They went from getting injured every month to not having any injuries in a year. I think that makes it tricky to do a good job doing the research.
100%. Yeah, so maybe if you are chronically injured, strength training might help. I mean, I'd maybe also say that actually, if your training isn't ideal and it's actually your training causing the injuries, like adding in resistance training might just change what you're doing enough anyway, that actually solves it. And yeah, like we said as well, it's potentially just going to make you a more well-rounded, healthy person. And if you're sort of chronically injured from running, that might still end up being a good outcome from your sort of running career, mightn't it? That actually you finish chasing times, but you're healthy and sort of set up for a better quality of life as you age. Yeah, that's where a lot of sport and exercise science goes, doesn't it? Now is quality of life improvements and not necessarily marathon performance at the sharp end of the field, but
yeah, and I guess I think the other thing is, but actually there's age consideration as well. Like actually over the age of 40, like especially in men, testosterone levels start to fall a little bit, and you are going to get a reduction in your muscle mass over time if you don't add in strength training. For later life, yeah, that's really important. But also for just masters athletes, there are plenty of people out there still trying to be the best athlete they can up into their 60s, 70s and older. Like one of the guys I had in the lab the other day, like he ran I'm not going to do him justice now. He won the World Masters Marathon Championships as a vet 65, and he's putting out crazy times. Like he's running like well under 3 hours. I think about 2 hours 40 something for a marathon.
I know who it is. He routinely takes me down at cross country.
Like it's just so for that sort of population, I think strength training becomes more important because you need to make sure we talk about you need that strength reserve. Well, if that top end ceiling of strength is reducing over time because of just age, then eventually that's going to come back to bite you. And I think for an example for me is that if I race a 3K, which I don't do very often, but sometimes I have raced a 3K a couple of years ago. I raced one, and it was I felt like I was sprinting the whole way, like physically, like my legs could not go any faster. I mean, I was running, I ran 8:18, which works out as like 33 seconds for 200, but the best I could only run for 200 flat out would be like a 29. So I'm operating only just below that. And I think if I was doing a mixture of sprint and sprint and strength training, then I'd have a bigger reserve, and I think that would have helped me at least feel more comfortable during the 3K, and probably would have translated into be able to run a bit faster as well, because I was literally on the red line of my top ends, like force output for 8 minutes 18 seconds. Which is why, like we've said already, I think it's more important in the middle distances where you need to be able to just run really, really fast. For me, who's someone who's very slow twitch, no speed at all, if I was going to go back and really ever go at middle distances, I mean, I'd be pretty useless, especially at 800. But if I wanted to go say, right, I'm having a season concentrating on 1500, I think I would get a lot of benefit from getting in the gym, getting a bit stronger.
Yeah. So if we're in the gym now, let's talk about what sort of stuff to do. So again, going back to just if you want, if you're just lifting and you just want hypertrophy and you just want to look bigger, again, maybe not what people sort of commonly think, but it doesn't matter whether you lift heavy or light. As long as you get close to failure in your resistance training, that will drive hypertrophy. In terms of strength and conditioning in a more specific sense of running, generally you want to be lifting on the sort of heavier end. That's where we're not looking to build muscle mass, but we're looking at these sort of maximal strength gains, these rate of force development gains, reactive strength as well. To target those, that's where you potentially need more heavier lifting. So, lower reps, heavier weight. This is where potentially finding out sort of your 1 rep max for any lifts you're thinking about doing may also be useful, because then you can sort of base it off of a percentage of your 1 rep max. But yeah, generally sort of lifting heavier is what's driving the sort of neuromuscular changes. Once, if you just want hypertrophy, it doesn't necessarily matter as much what you do, but for us, we're targeting these really specific changes, and actually, we need to lift heavier, because that is, again, what's if you want to increase your maximal strength, you need to lift it close to your maximal strength.
Exactly, it's pretty specific, it's pretty simple. Like, you can see, you like bodybuilders and that sort of stuff, they're often actually favoring not quite so heavy reps, because they can get really, really close to failure. Like, if you're doing like reps of like 20, then it's easier just to squeeze out one more rep, than actually if you're really close to your capacity, and the difference between one more rep and half and not being able to complete that rep is quite small. Then it's hard to really go to failure. Again, for the muscle breakdown, for hypertrophy, you want to really induce quite a lot of muscle breakdown, because you break down your muscle, you get satellite cells that are going to produce more muscle fibers, but you also get a hypertrophy of the individual muscle fiber. So you actually want to induce quite a lot of muscle damage. That's how you're going to, that repair process is going to lead to hypertrophy. Whereas that's not what we're after in the case of a distance runner.
There's a really, really nice mechanistic study, like I said, he'd come up a lot, this from Stuart Phillips's group, that had 2 groups of, one group did high rep or loads of reps but very lightweight, and another group did high weight and very low reps. And at the end of it, they both had similar amounts of hypertrophy, but then the high weight group, the low rep group, had that, the only difference between the groups was in terms of like maximal strength for things like bench press, where because they were lifting heavy weights, they then had the neuromuscular changes that allowed an increase in their 1 rep max, which is, again, sort of, it's a way of sort of, I guess, quantifying what we're targeting is increasing that 1 rep max. Whereas, again, like they found, if you just want hypertrophy, it doesn't matter what you do, both groups went close to failure, whether it was, whether it was 3 sets of 5 reps for the heavyweight group, or if it was, I don't know, 20 sets of 20 sets of 10 reps for the low weight group.
20 sets of 10 reps.
This is where I don't know, if you're lifting a really small but that's low weight sort of resistance training, it doesn't matter, they both went close to failure and they saw the hypertrophy. Whereas for the strength, the 1 rep max sort of strength gains, that's where you need to lift heavy.
I think that's another misnomer, isn't it? That people think, I'm an endurance athlete, so I need to improve my endurance. They go to the gym and they're doing, sets of 20 reps, thinking, right, it's going to improve their endurance. But actually, you're doing that in your training. You don't just replicate your training on a doing squats or on a machine. Like you can get those adaptations through running. The strength training is to add a different thing, which is more of those neuromuscular adaptations. And like I said earlier, with like the size principle of muscle fibers, you want to recruit all your muscle fibers when you're doing your lift. So you need to be pretty close to your max. And then like in terms of like putting numbers on that, you've already gave an example of 3 sets of 5. That's what the recommendation generally is. Maybe up to 4 sets of 5. But if you're if you're doing more than that, then you're probably not going to be able to lift as heavy as you need to lift. And I guess the other thing is actually, what's the intent behind it? Like for me, it's like 3 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 5, whatever you want to go to, but you should only just be able to get through that last set probably. It's going to be feel if it was easy, then actually you're just not lifting heavy enough. And to start off with in a strength block, that might be all right because you're just learning the movement and slowly building yourself in, because you want to get injured lifting, which is what is which can definitely happen. And I've had those sort of things before, which it's frustrating getting injured running, but if you get injured from doing stuff that you think is going to make you faster or help you running, it's even more frustrating, I think. Well, I find that personally.
And then I guess in terms of actual exercises, I mean, we're not going to make an exhaustive list of exercises, but I think you can. This is maybe where actually being more specific to running is important. Like, probably don't want to be doing bench press. Like, it's not going to be particularly useful.
It
It might be
if you're maybe in a close finish in a 1500 meters, that extra centimeter might be the difference in the dip. If you have who was it? What was the finish? If Josh Kerr hadn't had such a big chest, he wouldn't have been able to out dip the goose in the 1500 meters. So I don't know what you're saying there. I think maybe chest press is important. No, I'm not being serious, obviously, but not chest press.
I guess a mix of sort of explosive exercises. So you can look at the sort of Olympic lifts. So I guess clean and jerk, snatch, they all have really odd names. I guess running has odd names if you're not a runner, but running things, fartlek, what does that mean? But those sort of Olympic style lifts, they're good for potentially improving rate of force development. And where you're still lifting heavy, but there's a fast movement and intensity to the lift, that can potentially have some impact on that rate of force development. Again, this is maybe getting quite I guess granular, and like in reality, if you probably do some squats, some deadlifts, and some like weighted, I don't know, step ups or lunges, you're probably all right. But yeah, you can start to think about those Olympic lifts. I guess you'd probably also be wanting to do it under supervision to start with.
You make sure the technique's right. Like I said, don't hurt yourself. I think you're right, though. I think we can get carried away on what exercises you choose, but actually the main difference is going to be, are you doing strength training versus are you not doing strength training? And actually, if you're keeping the reps in the right sort of range, you're not doing sets of 20 or 30, you're doing sets that are like 4 to 6, then that's probably what you're going to be after. I sort of think when I'm talking about endurance for like team sport players, like I don't need to get someone in. I don't need to get a footballer or hockey player or whatever in my lab and go, what's your VO2 max, what's your thresholds, what's your economy? I can just get them to do some sort of endurance test and go, right, are you fit? Are you not fit compared to the rest of your squad? And if you're not very fit, do a bit more endurance training. And it probably doesn't matter what endurance training you do because you're not very fit. Anything's going to help. I think it's a bit the same for lifting for runners. Like if you start doing something, like it doesn't need to be rocket science. Especially as if you're talking about the Olympics and fine margins and you've been lifting for a very long time, then like what exercise you choose is probably really, really important. But if not, like for me, like I said, I've just been doing like half an hour of doing some squats, doing some calf raises, doing some hamstring bridges, and I've been doing four sets of 5 squats, and the first week I did 60 kilos. That felt pretty hard. Bearing in mind I'm 59 kilos. And then this week I did 4 sets of 5 times 80 kilos. And that also felt hard, but that's a massive improvement in my squat performance from just doing a little bit of squatting. And I haven't put on 10 kilos in weight either. So
I think just with exercises, it is worth mentioning, with running specifically, it's possibly worth doing some single leg stuff. There's a phenomenon known as the bilateral deficit, where essentially you can lift more with doing a single limb exercise than if you combine them. So, for example, like step ups, if you do them single leg, you can lift more with one leg than, I guess, if you combine them together.
It's easy for an example, isn't it? Like if you're going to do like a split squat, and you did 50 kilos, you're on your right and 50 kilos on your left, you think, well, all right, if I can do, so that's single leg. If I do both together, then surely I could lift 100 kilos. But actually, you'd find out you could only lift 80 kilos.
Yeah.
Which is that phenomenon there you're talking about.
Yeah, and for our specific sort of, where we're looking at running performance and where we're trying to lift a heavy amount of weight, you're going to get more muscle fiber recruitment if you do this sort of single leg stuff. And yeah, just it's going to result in higher fiber recruitment and higher rate of force development. I think there's also some feeling that it's, some exercises that are single leg are a bit more specific to running. You're always doing something on a single leg when you're running. You're never landing both feet at a time. So yeah, potentially lifting or doing some of your lifting as single leg stuff is maybe also worthwhile.
The disadvantage is often it's harder to load on a single leg, isn't it? So in theory that works, isn't it? But actually for me, I know that my balance is pretty rubbish. So doing a split squat, I find quite difficult. So yeah, it's that getting used to the technique and being able to be confident with lifting the weights without drop anything or fall over or whatever. But and I think one thing to say is like complex movements but using multiple joints seems to be better, like a squat versus going or doing a leg extensor machine, which is going to really target your quads, but actually it's going to be much more it's going to use more muscle groups. Doing a squat, which is you're going to use your calves and your glutes and your quads and everything together, compared to really isolating one single muscle. That seems to be beneficial, because that's how we run. We're not just contracting our quads as we put our leg forward and putting down our hamstrings as we as our trail leg comes through. It's all muscles working together.
And just in general, just a mix of everything as well, because we just mentioned this sort of the bilateral deficit phenomenon, but then also there's a specificity trap where if you just feel like what exercises are the closest to running and just do all of those, you're also gonna potentially run into issues. And like you said, as you come back to it, like just a classic squat is probably it's gonna target loads of muscle groups. Where we said before about the sort of Olympic lifts as well, they're almost the opposite of specific. They're just a loads of muscle group lift. So yeah, sort of there's not, like we said, there's not necessarily an exhaustive list of these are the ideal lifts to do, but there's just a few things to consider, I think, when you're lifting. I would say as well, a lot of the stuff we just mentioned is coming from a book by Rich Blagrove. He's got I guess you could almost call it the Bible on strength and conditioning for endurance runners.
I lent my copy to Owain about a year ago, and I've not seen it since. But yeah, no, it's a really good book, and
worth a read.
It's good. I would if you're interested in learning a bit more, then or actually it's got some really nice examples of exercises in there and like the rationale for why you do strength training. I'd thoroughly recommend that as a good book.
A lot of what we're talking about is coming from that book.
Yeah. I think we got a bit facetious, I think, about actually it doesn't really matter what you do, like what lift, like what exercises you do. And we said, don't do your chest press, for example, but just to be a bit more specific, like you're obviously it's your calves, your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes are going to be the main things that are going to influence run performance. And people going on a lot about the core, but I found a really nice paper. I can't remember the author's name, which is bad of me. But effectively, it might have even been a meta-analysis that looked at like what's the effects of different types of strength training programs on running economy, which is one of the main things you're trying to target with strength training improvements, and effectively found that lower body lifting was much more effective than just doing core training on running economy. So like if that's your main output, you're trying to affect running economy, then your core is probably not massively important. I'm not saying it's unimportant, but you're going to get more bang for your buck working on lower body strength. Actually, people got about I think people undervalue the calf. I think that's research definitely shows that's really, really important, because if you improve the sort of training that's going to improve your calf strength, is also going to improve the qualities of your Achilles tendon, which is like massive in recycling energy during running. So it stores energy on contact with the ground, stretches out the Achilles a little bit, and then when you let go, like an elastic band, when you take off like an elastic band, that's gonna give you a good energy return. And the more you can recycle energy, the more economical you're going to be. Just like putting on a pair of super shoes.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, another reason sort of we talked about maximal strength and rate of force development, but also running economy improvements are a potential benefit as well. Like you said, I don't think it's completely clear if that is the case. And we sort of know with running economy as well, just long-term running will sort of help. But I think maybe the thinking behind adding in strength conditioning is that, for most runners, that sort of pathway is tapped out. You might see really incremental gains like year on year, but that's not, that maybe doesn't necessarily cut it. Or, strength training might offer a quicker improvement compared to, just saying come back in a year's time and your economy might be a slight bit better, or spend loads of money on super shoes.
I think it's just a novel stimulus, isn't it? If you've not been exposed to something before, you start doing it, then you're going to get quite a big benefit. Whereas if you've been doing something for years and years and years, then like running, like when you're talking about very small improvements that you're going to see.
I think also maybe just worth touching on sort of the maybe acute impact that strength training is going to have on running. Just because it's worth bearing in mind. Like, I mean, Dan mentioned it on Strava when he strength trained the other day, but yeah, you're possibly going to have some DOMs. If you've not been in the gym for a few years or ever, then you're definitely going to have DOMs. Just prepare for that. Maybe take that into account with what you're sort of doing the next day. But yeah, there is some more sort of empirical research where researchers have had people do resistance training and then go for a run afterwards, and they sort of see in that sort of acute window, sort of 24 to 48 hours after resistance training, you do see an increase in VO2 and energy expenditure after resistance training when you're running. So that might factor into when you program your resistance training. Some other work found again an increase in VO2 and then slightly higher blood lactate levels, and also a lower jump height after resistance training. So I think what a common sort of structure that you see people do is that on their session days, they do their running session in the morning and then the resistance training in the afternoon. You can sort of really boil it down to hard days have all the hard stuff in, and then the easy days are just easy running. But you might also be, then if you've got these sort of 48 hours of potential impact of the resistance training, if you're doing a session on Tuesday and Friday like Dan is, and then a long run on Sunday, you're sort of getting out of that, or just about getting out of that 48-hour window after the resistance training if you do them on the same day. I mean, at the same time, Dan isn't doing that. You lifted on Saturday this week and then did a long run on Sunday, so
yeah, it was an easy long run though. So that's the thing. It's not a key. If it was a key session, I wouldn't be lifting the day before.
Yeah,
and I think that's the thing with strength training is, but it's definitely there's well established benefits to strength training, but actually there are potential consequences. Like, you could have a bit of hypertrophy, which might not be ideal if you're taking it too far. But I would say if you're not lifting correctly, then there's an injury risk there. But I think one of the hardest things is just for scheduling. When's it going to fit into your schedule and not interfere with the running? Because the running at the end of the day is the most important thing. So when you can finding a way where you can fit the gym training in, I think is difficult, and it's probably quite individual, like depending on like you as a person, but also just what's your schedule like what's your timetabling like, when have you actually got a chance to lift. That's going to make a big difference. And I think the other thing is when you start a lifting program, having not done any, you've probably just got to accept that you are going to be sore for the first couple of sessions. So that's a good, so choosing when you're going to start lifting is is a good idea as well. Like having a good thought process about that. Like for me, if I hadn't done any lifting and then it got to like 6 weeks to go to Valencia and I thought, right, I'm going to start a gym session, didn't start going to the gym now, I think that would have been a bad idea because I would have been sore. That would have taken away from the key sessions. I'd also probably be too fatigued to actually put out enough quality in the gym to get any benefits out of it. So if you're going to take it into a marathon block, I would go, right, start early, and then even if you need to back off, you can just go into like a maintenance phase around the key competitions, just maintain those adaptations rather than just keep building and building and building. Yeah. I think that's something that's is just very much an individual thing that you're not going to find a paper and say, yeah, this is the ideal time you should lift. You need to probably work it out yourself a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I guess there's the ideal, and then there's what you can actually practically do. I think
I would say, just on
yeah.
like more practical implications as well. I also would go, I've only, this is me being hypocritical. I think trying to get in do something twice a week is probably important. I don't think once a week is enough to really see massive changes, especially if you've for me, I've only been able to get in once a week just from a logistics point of view, but I'm going to try and get that to twice. But I was also just starting off, so I didn't probably need a big stimulus to see improvements. But if you're someone who's been has got a semi-regularly been doing some resistance work, then twice a week I think is a really good target. I don't think you're necessarily going to get that much more from doing 3 times, but I think once is probably just not frequent enough to see changes in any meaningful time frame.
Yeah, I think again, I'm now citing another piece of Rich Blagro's research. I think this is from a meta-analysis possibly, or a lit review maybe, but yeah, they talked about that. So you can get some strength training or strength gains from 1 session a week, but the best sort of dose response outcome is 2 to 3 sessions a week. And with 3, yeah, like we say, you're running into how much time you have already, and then also how much impact that has on your sessions. If you're lifting 3 times a week, you're definitely going to have DOMs like at least on one of your sessions or long runs. And yeah, maybe out of, if you've run an autumn marathon and then up until Christmas you're just sort of ticking the legs over, maybe 3 times a week is actually fine then. But if you're building into a spring marathon, you maybe want to be sort of best condition for your 2 to 3 sessions a week, then yeah, 3 times a week might be too much. So yeah, 2 to 3 times a week, but how it fits your schedule, I guess.
Yeah, it's about periodization as well, isn't it? Like as you just said, like what phase are you in? Are you rebuilding after a marathon? Then yeah, maybe get in the gym a bit more. If you're in the final few weeks, then actually you could probably cut it down to once a week and maintain those adaptations, knowing that you're doing enough to maintain, but you're not going to build any of those neuromuscular qualities during that block, which you might just have to be settled with that during the you've got other priorities in the final block of a marathon.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think. Should we wrap it up there? Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of what we know, we've covered it. There will be people out there that know way more.
Well,
they're not pulling their hair out.
We can't just do a whole. We're not going to cover all of strength and conditioning in 51 minutes 55 seconds, are we? That you could. I think we could definitely do follow-ups on this. Yeah, but I think like to summarize, it's like if you try and do something twice a week. You're not going to put on muscle mass unless you are eating crazy amounts or you're in those sessions. If you go into the gym twice a week, you're there for 4 hours. Like that's the only way you're going to be doing it. Probably good. Yeah, probably is going to help injury resistance. And for those people who are injury prone, then actually that lifting might be the thing that revolutionizes your running, because it's going to enable you to run more. But even if you're not injured, you can get some good improvements in running economy and probably your ability to just run really fast, like sprint, be more explosive, be more powerful, and just be a more well-conditioned runner if you do strength training. Do you think that's a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so. And also just lift heavy.
Lift heavy. Yeah. Don't go. Sets of 4 to 6 reps, I'd say, as a ballpark. Yeah. Nice. So I got one thing to do before we wrap up this podcast is again thank our sponsor SOAR. for supporting this podcast. And yeah, I really appreciate their support, their belief in us, but we're putting out good content, and that actually the people who are listening to our podcast can really benefit from their products. They're really, really nice products. Their vests are incredible, like the lightest, most breathable, running vests I've ever tried on. And yeah, we've both been running their club vests, really, really nice. Just gives you just like psychological edge on race day. You put that on and you go, oh yeah, this feels so much better than what I used to run in growing up as a kid, which would have seams everywhere and weigh a ton. And I remember doing cross country races or even marathons where I've just chucked water over myself and I've ended up, you feel heavy, whereas yeah, the Saw vests are just another level. So go check them out. Really, really nice products. Not the cheapest, but it's an investment. And actually, if you're spending all this time running and listening to podcasts like this, go treat yourself. They're just you won't regret it. They're really, really nice.
Yeah, nice. Definitely, yeah. Check out Saw, and yeah, it's worth spending money on good quality product. I think like you can buy 3 pairs of shorts and have to bin them all because they're rubbish.
I know. I've done that so many times. I've gone on a well-known website which sponsors lots of running events, and gone on running shorts and gone on price low to high. Found the cheapest one that looks half decent. Bought a pair for 15 quid and hated it. And I've probably done that 3 or 4 times. And that's one really nice pair of shorts that you know you're going to like and you know you're going to get on with, and they're going to feel great. And every time you're going to run them, and they're going to feel great. And they last too. Like the products lasts. Like it's just I'm all about that environmental, like not just buy once and bin, like buy something that's going to be good, so you're going to enjoy using it, and it's going to last like many marathon blocks. But yeah, nice. I've got to go out for a run. So let's wrap this podcast up, because otherwise, we'll have something less to talk about on our Road to Valencia series. So yeah, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.
See you soon.